This week's double parasha, Vayakhel-Pekudei, concludes the whole saga of the building of the Mishkan. And this is something that the Torah spends an enormous amount of time and effort on. In fact, 5 parashiot, Truma, Tetzaveh, Kitisa, Vayakhel-Pekudei. And each item of the Mishkan is very carefully described, how exactly it must be made. The Torah goes into who the craftsmen were, who exactly assisted in its building, how much money was raised, all of the fundraising efforts, how long it took, etc., etc. Every single detail is very clearly put across. And then in this week's parasha, in fact, the second of the 2 parashot is called Pekudei, which means the reckonings, the countings. And the Torah tells us that Moshe took account, he took a reckoning, he took an audit of the different precious metals that were used in the construction of the Mishkan. Now, why was this important? Why did he have to do this? Hashem came to the Jewish people and he said, I want you to build me a Mishkan. I want you to build me a tabernacle. Could there be a more important project than that? Absolutely not. They were building, as it were, an edifice for the sake of God. Everybody got involved, men, women, and children. People brought their jewels. People came to help with the sewing and the knitting and the weaving. Everybody, they did it out of the goodness of their hearts. Natva libam, says the Torah many, many times. They came out of the generosity of their hearts. Why was there a need to go into all of the details and to be like an accountant and an auditor and to say this is how much gold there was and this is how much silver there was? Why is that so important? But our sages tell us no, on the contrary, it was very, very important. Because even though this was the most important religious project that had really ever been completed by mankind, nevertheless, it had to be in a way that we would say today was completely and utterly transparent. Everybody had to know what money was used. Was there any gold over? Was there any silver over? And what was used with those excess funds? Even though Moshe was the most trustworthy person possible, he still made it absolutely clear to those people that he was serving, to his congregants, to the nation, that he had used the money properly. And this is such an important idea, because today it is so vital that every organization, and specifically public organizations, are transparent, that people know what is the money being spent on. Because these type of organizations, welfare organizations, shuls, communities, they are funded by the community. They are funded by the congregation. The congregation wants to know where their money is going to. And therefore, one has to be completely transparent. And so we find in halakha many, many examples of the principle of what's called that you should be clean and righteous, not just in the eyes of God, but in the eyes of man also. Even if your conscience is clear and you know that you used the money only on that which was appropriate, nevertheless, you have to prove to your constituents that you were transparent and that the money was used properly. So, for example, the halakha is that when people go around to collect money for some type of communal cause, they always have to collect in no less than 2 people. Because when there's one person, there's going to be far less transparency. So when it comes to charity collectors, there have to be at least 2 charity collectors. Or another incredible example that the Talmud tells us, that in the temple there was a chamber, and in this chamber all of the charitable donations were placed. Every year, every Jew in Israel had to give a half a shekel. And of course, as you could imagine, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of half shekels that went to the temple, that were used for the upkeep of the temple, to buy all of the different sacrifices, the communal sacrifices, etc. And this chamber was full of these half shekels. Well, naturally, the gizbar, the treasurers, would have to come in and they would have to take the money and then they would use it to spend on these communal goods. So the Talmud tells us as follows, that those people who had the right, they had access into that chamber, were not allowed to go into that chamber with any article of clothing into which they could have put the money. They weren't allowed to go in with a garment that had pockets. They weren't allowed to go in with shoes that they could have slipped the money in the shoes. They weren't even allowed to go in wearing tefillin, because there was the possibility that people would say, oh, he slipped some of that money into his tefillin. And they had to be 100% transparent, so that when they walked out with money in their hands, nobody would ever suspect that they had taken that money and used it for their own deeds. And this is so very vital, and this is something that takes us back to the time of Moshe. Even though Moshe knew that he was a person with the utmost integrity, and probably the community knew that Moshe was a person of utmost integrity. And even though this was the most important spiritual project and people gave willingly and they gave more than they needed to, nevertheless, Moshe said it's 100% vital that we have to be transparent, that people know where their funds are going to. And in that way, we will be clean in the eyes, not just of God, but the eyes of man too. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.